Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving the extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. I'm fresh back from the Turkish barbers. Every hair on my head has been carefully attended to. My face is sort of on fire and sort of incredibly relaxed, hot towels and everything. It's a wonderful experience always. It's, day before a holiday, gotta look good. Well, at least as good as this face can. So I am ready to give you a soupçon of what is going on in Ukraine. What can I offer you in this smorgasbord of delights, or indeed horrors, given that this is a war and nothing to delight in? Well, on the more amusing side of the war, we do have the TikTok army. And I showed you a video the other day. So these are the Chechen warriors, scapegoats warriors, that have been operating in Ukraine, or indeed in this case inside Russia. So I showed you a video the other day of a guy firing off an RPG, and it turns out that that was geolocated to 2 kilometers inside Russia, firing at a bush inside Russia about 300 meters from the Ukrainian border, basically just for show. Anyway, my goodness, like if you want some just a little bit of amusement to allow you to get through the day dealing with the horrors of the war, here is some amusement of the war. And this can't be serious, right? Here is a guy pretending to be Rambo and taking a video, but I love the fact that this video wasn't quite cut soon enough, and you've got him just basically looking at his guns, working out what he needs to do. So here is Rambo Chechen. A few things to note here. One, what's he got against the tree? Like, I'm going to take you down, tree. I know I'm only 2 meters away from you, but damn it, I'm going to shoot you. Second point, listen to the silence after he finishes shooting. There ain't no one there. And third thing, like, he's clearly not in a war zone because he's sitting around here going, now what do I do? Have I run out? Why is my gun not firing? Just, well done, I guess. Right, Arty Green, who is a Ukrainian commander who has been featured on many videos and interviews. He does this regular one with, I presume, a Ukrainian TV channel or something. Here he gives his opinions of the war and the counteroffensive. What's happening on the battlefield, says the interviewer. How, from your perspective, is combat activity unfolding? And he replies, the active phase of Ukraine's armed forces offensive is in full swing. The mobile phase is ahead of us. We are in a phase of intense attrition of the enemy's troops and equipment on the line of contact and in the close rear of the enemy. The enemy is injecting, out of necessity, its reserves forces in the portions of the front where his forces are losing combat effectiveness. My understanding is that the enemy reserves are depleting fast, and in the foreseeable future, the enemy won't have forces left to inject. In turn, the loss of combat effectiveness of the enemy forward forces will enable Ukrainian forces to switch to mobile operations. We've all read and we are all happy that we freed Staromyorsk. How important is it? As it is claimed to be an enemy a key enemy strong point. If you can tell us. I'm not in this direction, so it's difficult for me to judge and explain it concretely, says Arty Green. Of course, we're all happy when we move forward. The enemy hasn't chosen the tactic of gradually falling back from its lines. Instead, they've chosen to rigidly cling to all positions they are currently holding. It's definitely not the best approach from a military standpoint, or rather one of the worst possible approaches. More than that, the enemy has even launched a local offensive in the north of the Luhansk region, which is doomed to fail. Right, just to dwell on this is exactly what I've been talking about previously and it's the idea the Russians have chosen to robustly defend every meter of territory by doing lots of counterattacks, by really not giving up anything. And on the one hand, that is making life for the Ukrainians difficult. And you might think, goodness me, it's really slow going at the moment. Kind of the Russians are scapegoats winning this phase of the war, I guess, in terms of they are defending really quite effectively. They have the defenses built and dug, they've dug themselves in, and they're not giving up an inch. But on the other hand, they are suffering huge losses in terms of attrition because they are putting up such a robust defense. They are counterattacking. The Ukrainians are using counter battery fire. They're using drones and HIMARS and artillery to really good effect. And is this the best decision for the Russians? Will they get to a point where suddenly they have exhausted themselves defensively? And he says, in the Luhansk region where they're doing those counterattacks and trying to give the Ukrainians something to think about, he says it's doomed to fail. Not only they have no large reserves, so they are throwing them into this attack in an area with rugged, complex terrain, making no operative sense at all, with no operative prospects at all. In the absolute best case scenario for them, they could have taken the eastern bank of the Oskil River. But it seems that they have no chance for that now, at least from what one can see regarding what's taking place there. Their attack won't have any operative tactical impact. And I think this is pretty important. And he continues possibly even no tactical effect. So the idea is, if you remember the map, they are the Zherebets River. They've advanced west of Svatova, and they got sort of 5 kilometers into Ukrainian territory, and then kind of stalled because the Ukrainians pulled in some reinforcements. They started defending properly there. They don't have any minefields particularly, and trenches dug in, not like the Russians on the southern front line. And so the Russians were able to advance fairly quickly, but then the Ukrainians were on it, and now they've been pushed back almost to where they started. And as Arty Green here says, to what effect? What was the outcome of that? Really, they could have got to the Oskil River, but they didn't. Yes, they've taken a couple of small villages, he says. The thing is that this theatre of operation is meaningless. Why? Explain to us, Arty, in what way is it meaningless? He says the terrain is rugged and heavily forested, very difficult for any offensive action. Something like the Kiev region? She asks about that pretty much. And in an absolute best case scenario for them, they'll bump into the Oskil River. And if our command decides to withdraw from the whole eastern bank of the Oskil River, it's a very sparsely populated area. Yes, there are some villages there, but it's very difficult terrain for offensive operations and very suitable for defense. That's why it's very unlikely that they'll have even tactical successes in that direction. Yes, they've taken a village here, a village there in the low terrain. Nowhere did they reach the heights. It's an incomprehensible undertaking from a military standpoint for me, especially now that we are on the offensive. And this is fascinating, actually. I mean, this is really ragging on the Russians here and saying what a senseless thing, because the Russians really could. They were. You looked at Rebar and the pro-Russian sources kind of trumpeting this counteroffensive up in that area. You look at some of the other mappers saying, "Oh, Russians make huge advances," so on and so forth. But actually, according to Arty Green, and as we survey the front line now, it does seem that they have achieved very little. He continues, the difference of people, or she says, difference of people like us here in Kiev, or people in Paris, New York, London, and Washington, we are all away from the front lines, and so you are very close to it. If you can, what's your take on all the talk that the offensive isn't going as fast as we'd like? It's not even so much as Ukrainians saying so, more our Western partners, with lots of press articles, leaks in the press saying so in major newspapers like Bild and other major outlets. There is so much going on around Ukraine's offensive, so much talk around, even defeatist talk saying, in essence, if it all fails, then the time for peace talks comes. These are some of the takes that we see amongst our Western partners. Well, we aren't surprised that they like to panic, it seems, even when it's not necessary. And even we'd like your take on it, on our tactics and strategy. How are we moving? Only what can you tell, of course? And he says, I can see that our high command has at least converged towards a combat approach that brings results. The metric of this effect, and by the way, going back to what I've said recently, it's all about what your objectives are as to how you set your metrics of success. And here he says, I can see that our high command has at last converged towards a combat approach that brings results. The metric of this effect are for now not gains in kilometers. These will come inevitably at a later stage. The metric is the ratio and volume of losses and during the fighting. So he's saying the success here is the attrition rate and the ratio, which is not only how many of the enemy can we take out the game, but how few troops can we lose. So that's the metric. So that you've got two metrics actually there. It's one of our objectives is killing the enemy, and the other objective is not losing our troops. And in that you have your ratio. The loss ratio, he says, is indisputably in our favor several times, close to an order of magnitude. So here's a guy who is not afraid to tell you to, call a spade a spade. He says it like it is. And he's saying it's close to 10 times more troops the Russians are losing than the Ukrainians. And, trustworthiness, I think this guy has it a lot more than many of the people we might listen to. I mean, that's close to an order of magnitude. We aren't carrying out frontal storming with large forces. We are putting pressure on the enemy, forcing them to bring forward to contact and in the close rear their reserves, their artillery assets, their armor, and we are successfully taking them out, their troops and their heavy equipment. The rate of attrition of their troops is such that by winter it will disappear. So he's playing also the long game here. So talking about, so we might not be getting kilometers, but we're not really measuring success in kilometers. Not yet. That will come inevitably. Exactly what I've said previously. He's saying, but come winter, there ain't going to be nothing left in the tank for them. Although it doesn't happen like that in reality, the enemy forces first lose combat effectiveness after losing a part of its resources, and then the initiative. And more precisely, the offensive then switches to the mobile phase. Once the enemy loses the capacity to counter our mobile units that start wreaking their rear, taking over their positions and kicking in significant geographic changes. From what I can see, it's all moving according to that path. The rate of attrition is so high that the Russian army isn't managing the replenishment. More than that, they are losing troops of such a quality that they won't be able to replenish at all in the foreseeable future. We are talking about paratroopers, assault troops. It's not so simple now for the Russians to push people into combat. And those who go to combat are people from specific inclinations. From a moral standpoint and purely combat capability, Russia is actively losing them in large numbers, replacing them with Mobics, who've been press ganged into their army. That's not a satisfactory replacement. Without the mainstay of these quality troops, the army is combat ineffective for all intents and purposes. That's why things are going the right way for us. During the Kherson operation on the Western Bank, he was involved in that, of the Dnipro, the phase lasted for about 2 months, after which Russia had to withdraw its troops. And more precisely, what was left of their troops. We were talking about the Kherson offensive last year, correct? She said, well, so this is so interesting. I mean, this is one of the most important excerpts of any of the videos I've done with you recently, because this, yes, it's really positive, but actually this all makes sense. I mean, it's what we've been saying for some time, but here's a Ukrainian person on the ground saying exactly this, and saying that, and it makes so much sense. It took us 2 months in Kherson, and once we had attrited them to a certain point, the Russians realized that they didn't have the ability to defend in a way that they would have required, so they withdrew. And we're going to get to maybe 2 months here. Now, they're able to supply the troops better here, given that they don't have the Dnipro River issue that where the bridges were bombed, right? But the Ukrainians have absolutely hammered logistics in an even more fundamental way, that the Russian troops are going to be getting to a point at some point soon, one hopes, where they're going to be unable, they're going to be combat ineffective and unable to do the job that they're in place to do. And it's not just a case of losing the numbers, but the types of troops they're losing. They are losing their better troops, as well as Mobics, of course, but they're consistently losing their good troops and replacing them with Mobics. So the force density is getting thinner and thinner, and the force quality is getting compromised. This is just a really positive outlook here. That, because I worry, I go up and down with how I view the counteroffensive, but with my rational head on, I just think they are tricking. If it's true that they are tricking what is claimed, and here's Arty Green confirming that, then the Russians are surely going to hit a brick wall soon, where they've got no option but to capitulate. And I think this is massive. So that's a really important interview there, and yeah, I'd love to share more of that with you. I am going to move on. I might dip into that actually tomorrow or the next day, or at some point over the net whenever I get a spare bit of time between hopping from one pool to the bar or something like that on my holidays. With MS, I ain't going to be doing any hopping. But there you go. Right, we have another interview here. This is a BBC interview with what's he called?
We're on our way to a secret location, a place they call the edge of existence. Behind the wheel, the man simply
just Ghost. Yeah, that's it, Ghost.
Привод.
So in this interview, that is talked about a little bit in Euromaidan Press, written up in the BBC. I'm going to dip into this. So this is again returning to the topic of snipers. Ukrainian forces are trying to retake the city of Bakhmut in the country's east. The BBC was given exclusive access to a team of elite snipers referred to as the Ghosts of Bakhmut, who are conducting night raids nearby. Ghost, the sniping team's commander, takes us to the place he calls the edge of existence. They're based on the outskirts of the city. Ghost is my call sign, he tells me. When we started bringing terror to Bakhmut, we got the name Ghosts of Bakhmut. Their base is already well within the range of Russian artillery. Ghost doesn't flinch at the crump of a shell landing nearby. Quote, the artillery always makes people worry, he says. You can hide from artillery, but not from a sniper. The Ghosts, a team of 20 soldiers, have been operating on the edges of Bakhmut for the past 6 months. They often hunt for high-value targets. I asked Ghost how many Russians his team have killed. He says, there's a confirmed number, 524. Wow. 76 of those are mine. One man has shot 76 Russian soldiers. The team electronically records every shot through the sights of their rifles. Not everyone's keeping count, though. Kuzia, the marksman for tonight's mission, says, it's nothing to be proud of. We're not killing people, we're destroying the enemy. Before the war, he worked in a factory. He says he never liked guns, but felt compelled to take up arms when Russia invaded. Kuzia does one final check of his US-made Barrett sniper rifle. Quote, each mission is dangerous. When we make a mistake, the enemy can hit you, he says. Of course I'm scared. Only a fool wouldn't be. On tonight's mission, he'll be accompanied by Taras, his spotter. Kush is the driver, who will bring them as close as possible to the front line. From there, the two-man team will have to walk more than a mile to reach their target. Ghost will remain back at the base, along with a rookie known simply as the Brit. The youngest member of the team got his name after receiving his initial training in the UK. He's yet to have his first confirmed kill. Ghost says he's handpicked every member of the team based on their humanity and patriotism, rather than their military experience and skills, and so on and so forth. And it goes into sort of anecdotes or stories of what they've been doing. And it ends, over the past 6 months, several of the team have been injured, including the commander Ghost, but none of them has been killed. Ghost says, quote, every trip may be our last, but we're doing a noble deed. One small team of snipers won't win this war or even take back Bakhmut, but they believe they're having an impact. Kush says it's a psychological effect on their enemy, hunting down one Russian soldier at a time from a place that can't be seen and with a sound that can't be heard. Good stuff there from the BBC and those snipers in Bakhmut, and we've heard that they are responsible for the second biggest proportion of troop deaths in the war. It goes artillery, then it goes snipers, and even when there's a bigger counteroffensive going on, where maybe small arms fire and other things might be responsible for more deaths, and maybe shelling comes down a little bit, or there might be a slight change in percentages, it's still snipers second, apparently. So that is pretty significant. Right. One of the last things I'm going to go through, a little bit shorter today. This thread analyzes the situation. This is from Tataragami. Situation at Berdyansk Airport. And this is something I've been wondering about a lot. In fact, I think I've talked about it with you previously a little bit. Berdyansk Airport, focusing on Russian helicopters. So if you remember, there was a good 20 helicopters that came and sort of set up shop at Berdyansk Airfield. But the question is, why don't they get taken out? Amid the ongoing offensive, observers may find it puzzling that these helicopters, and you can see them all there in that satellite image, why these helicopters remain unscathed at their base in Berdyansk, enabling them to swiftly access the front lines. And of course, they are causing havoc for the Ukrainian troops on the front lines with their ability to use ATGMs with like an 8-kilometer range that outdoes the range of the ATGMs that are firing back at them, taking out mechanized equipment particularly. The Russian air threat persists in this counteroffensive, demanding additional consideration. One strategy involves neutralizing helicopters on the ground before they take flight. While the airfield is within Ukraine's long-range capabilities, the situation is more complex. One major challenge is the significant spacing between the helicopters, making it difficult to effectively target them with a single missile. Given the limited availability of long-range weapons, using a missile that may or may not destroy some Mi-24s becomes hard to justify. The reason why I use may or may not is due to the presence of substantial air defense systems both inside and outside the airport perimeter. This means that launching a missile doesn't guarantee success, as it could face countermeasures. Other options, like a massive missile launch combined with drones to overwhelm defenses, may seem viable, but cost efficiency becomes a significant concern in such scenarios. This is where the GLSDB, ground launched small diameter bomb, can prove highly valuable. They're waiting to get these. These are fired out of HIMARS or other multiple launch rocket systems, and are basically dumb bombs that have been a bit like the JDAMs that are fired from the air with guidance and GPS and glide capabilities. These bombs have been adapted to be able to fire out of HIMARS or multiple launch rocket systems to a greater range and hopefully do some decent damage. The weapon's operational range, relatively low cost compared to ATACMS or Storm Shadow, and capability to evade specific countermeasures make it a potential game changer in situations like this. But until then, significant efforts and creativity will be required to destroy these targets. This thread and imagery were made possible thanks to your generous donations via Buy Me a Coffee, he says. So, and ask for that. And by the way, I meant to say earlier in my map update, Andrew Perpetua's awesome. I'm hopefully going to have another live with him at some point soon. He has quite heavy expenses for his mapping. So if you do check out his work, do drop him a Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal. I think he's got PayPal on his description for his videos. So many people rely on him, and including myself. And I need to show him some love. But yeah, show him some support if you are able and willing to, because his work he's doing is tremendous. So that's my big up to Andrew Perpetua there. Anyway, thanks so much. Really appreciate all your support. Take care. I will be with you throughout my holiday, which starts tomorrow. I will do my videos, or at least some of them, tomorrow morning if I can. But obviously my schedule will be somewhat affected. Speak soon, Toodle Pips.